Hi everyone, it's Katie from Paradise Falls family. In this video, we'll be taking you through our trip to Canada and Alaska in August 2024. This was an amazing trip and one that we put a lot of thought into and spent a lot of time planning. In this vlog series, we'll talk through a different aspect of the trip in each video. But here I'll give an overview of our trip to set the scene and explain what went into our planning before travelling. Our trip was essentially split into two parts. The first part was a road trip through Alberta and British Columbia, beginning in Calgary, followed by Canmore, Golden, Kamloops and ending in Vancouver. Then the second part was a week's cruise to Alaska with Disney Cruise Line. We were away for around 2.5 weeks in all and had an amazing time. Going into our trip in more detail, we started off our journey in London at the Delta Heathrow Windsor Hotel, where we'd stayed overnight. If you've watched our vlogs before, you'll know that this is one of our preferred Heathrow hotels as it offers a really great deal on parking for the duration of your holiday. We paid £552 for the room for the night as a family of 4 and then 2.5 weeks of parking, booked through Holiday Extras. The hotel is only around a 10 to 15 minute taxi journey away from the terminals, which you can easily book in the hotel the night before for around £36. The hotel also helpfully has a self-service kiosk to pre-book taxis, which makes it so easy. We've always been really comfortable here. The rooms have always been spacious with 2 double beds and a decent bathroom, and we've never had any issues with noise. The parking is so easy and we've always enjoyed staying here, so would highly recommend it before a flight from Heathrow. Our first stop was Calgary in Alberta, which sits on the edge of the Rocky Mountains and is the best way to access the national parks nearby. It also has direct flights to and from London, which makes things a lot easier rather than having to change elsewhere. We enjoyed a really smooth flight out from Heathrow with Air Canada, an airline we used on our last trip to Canada and one we always enjoy. They have a great policy on seat reservations as they always sit children with their parents, meaning we saved a few £100 not having to book our seats in advance, which was a really nice change. The selection of movies and TV shows was brilliant too, so we'd really recommend Air Canada if you're heading over to Canada anytime soon. We checked in for our first 3 nights at the Westin Calgary. We really love Westin hotels and managed to find a great deal on this one with 3 nights for £422 through Expedia, which we thought was really reasonable. I'll go into more detail later in the series on the hotel and our time in Calgary, but we had a great time exploring the city and popping over to Drumheller for a day out in the Badlands. Our next stop was Canmore, around an hour's drive from Calgary and right on the edge of Banff National Park. Our first preference was to actually stay in Banff itself, but it was really expensive, so to bring the cost down we stayed in nearby Canmore, around 20 minutes away, for a fraction of the price. We enjoyed 3 nights at the Coast Canmore Hotel, using this as a base for exploring Banff, Lake Louise and the surrounding area, before we moved west to Golden. We'd originally booked to stay in Jasper, a couple of hours further north, for 2 nights, but due to the awful wildfires which hit the town, we had to rearrange a few weeks before to stay in Golden, further south instead. Although this wasn't what we had planned, we'd already looked at visiting Golden and so knew a few things to do in the area and had 2 lovely nights here at the Holiday Inn Express Kicking Horse. From here we then started our big drive west to Vancouver, which in total is around an 8-hour drive. So we split the journey in Kamloops, spending a night at the Delta Hotel there and arriving in Vancouver the day before our cruise. We always like to arrive a day or 2 before any cruise, just in case of unexpected delays, so we had some time to drop off our rental car and relax in the city. This is where we splashed out a bit, with a night at the amazing Pan Pacific Hotel, right above the cruise terminal, so it was really easy and relaxing on the morning of the cruise itself. We then boarded the gorgeous Disney Wonder the next day around midday for a 7-night cruise to Alaska, with 2 days at sea, a glacier viewing day, which is effectively another day at sea, and then stops at Icy Strait Point, Juneau and Ketchikan. The cruise was absolutely brilliant. It was everything we dreamed and a lovely way to explore this part of the world. We disembarked the cruise a week later on a Monday morning and spent the day in Vancouver before heading to the airport for our overnight flight back to London. It was then another short taxi ride back to the Delta Hotel where we parked our car, and then we were able to get on the road home quickly and easily. So that was a quick whistle-stop tour of our itinerary to give you an idea of what we fit in. I'll talk about all of these places and our cruise, hotels, etc. in detail later in the vlog series. But for now, I'll talk you through some of the work that went into our planning and how we put the trip together. First of all, how did we set our route and itinerary? The main reason for doing this trip in the first place was to experience the Alaskan cruise. We knew that we wanted to do this and cruise with Disney, who are by far our favourite cruise line. So it was a case of picking the cruise and then building a holiday around it. The most obvious choice for the other 7 to 10 days would have been to stay in Vancouver and the surrounding area like Vancouver Island and Whistler. This would also have been a bit cheaper in terms of accommodation, car and flight costs. However, we'd already visited these places a few years ago, and you can find these vlogs already on our channel, and so we wanted to try something different. Alberta and the Rocky Mountains was another place on our list to visit, so we decided to try and build an itinerary with this involved. It meant a fairly lengthy drive between Alberta and Vancouver, around 8 hours in all. So we looked at a few options, including flying or getting the train, but neither saved much time or was very cost effective, so we settled on driving with a break for a night in Kamloops. The next step was deciding on how to split our time in Alberta. The main tourist destinations are in the southwest corner. Most of Alberta is actually pretty flat, with the prairies and the Badlands. It's just the bottom corner where the Rockies start. We would have liked to have seen Edmonton, but it was a bit further away and we just couldn't find a way to fit it in. Calgary was then the obvious destination to start our trip, with there being direct flights from the UK, so we started with a few nights there. We knew we wanted to visit Drumheller, which is billed as the dinosaur capital of the world, and considered a night here, but decided a day trip would be enough and easier to do rather than moving hotels again. Then it was on to the Rockies. Banff and Jasper are the two main destinations here, as well as places such as Canmore, Lake Louise and Golden. We did some research on what we wanted to see and do and decided to split our time between Banff and Jasper. In the end, we settled on staying in Canmore rather than Banff, simply due to cost, but it still worked really well for us and we were able to explore the region well with this plan. We of course had to rearrange our plans due to the wildfires in Jasper, and we had to find a different route from Canmore to Kamloops rather than going via Jasper, which is how we then settled on Golden. The key thing for us in deciding on where to visit and for how long was what we wanted to see and do, and then the driving time between each place. For this, we read our guidebooks, watched loads of vlogs and did our research to come up with a list of places to visit and what we wanted to do, which included Jasper and Banff as the key towns, as well as Lake Louise and initially the Sky Bridge at Golden. We then checked the driving time between each place and started sketching out an itinerary, trying to keep the drive time each day to a reasonable amount both for us and the kids. At this point we decided we couldn't fit in Golden due to the extra driving required, so settled on 3 nights in Canmore Banff area and then 2 nights in Jasper, before our stopover in Kamloops. Once we decided on the route, we started costing it up. Focusing on flights and accommodation first. While Calgary has an international airport, there are less flights than in and out of Vancouver, meaning it's more expensive in general to fly in or out of Calgary. So this initially caused us a problem, and we had to look for savings on our accommodation as a result. And this is part of the reason we ended up staying in Canmore rather than Banff to reduce the cost here. Having shopped around, we decided to book our flights, car and some of the accommodation through trail finders. We compared their price to that if we booked everything ourselves directly, and we found them to be slightly cheaper, and their package also included baggage for the flights, so was slightly better. So in the end we used trail finders to book the flights with Air Canada, the car with Alamo, the 3 nights in Canmore, 2 nights in Jasper and 1 night in Vancouver. We found better options in Calgary and Kamloops, so booked these ourselves. The initial price for this was just over £7,000 plus $400 for our hotel in Calgary and £150 for our hotel in Kamloops, both booked through Expedia, which is our preferred site for accommodation if we don't go to the hotels directly. I've provided links to all of the hotels we used below. I have to say that trail finders were excellent, packaging everything up for us, and were really proactive and helpful when the fires in Jasper happened, immediately giving us a full refund on the Jasper hotel and helping us to arrange alternative accommodation elsewhere before everything else booked up. In the end, we decided to book the hotel in Golden ourselves through IHG, which added about £150 to the cost. But this was simply because hotel prices went a bit crazy as everyone looked to rebook quickly. Another thing trail finders did to really impress us was a month before we went, we got a phone call saying that they always recheck prices to ensure the best deals, and they'd done this for us without any prompting from ourselves and had managed to save us over £500. We'd already paid in full, so they'd just sent the £500 refund across to us really quickly. We were blown away by this and have never experienced it with any other travel agent. We will absolutely use trail finders again. Touching briefly on the hotels, the Westin in Calgary was a no-brainer for us as we love this chain, the reviews on TripAdvisor were pretty good and the price was excellent. Our hotel in Canmore was harder to nail down. As I said, we wanted to stay in Banff, but the prices were really crazy, so we wanted to try and find somewhere cheaper, but somewhere we'd feel comfortable and safe. We looked at Lake Louise, but there weren't lots of options here, and it was further from Banff that we really wanted to be. So we looked at Canmore, which had a lot more options, was closer to Banff, and was more reasonably priced. To narrow it down, we checked prices, reviews, and we knew that we wanted a hotel with a swimming pool for the kids, which is partly why we ended up choosing the Coast Canmore. In terms of Jasper, again it was a little pricey with fewer options, so we settled on the Whistler's Inn downtown. Obviously we then had to rebook, and it was a case of what we could find in and around Golden. We love the IHG group and are always really comfortable in their hotels, so decided to play it safe with the Holiday Inn Express, which was available at a reasonable price. For Kamloops, we knew we wouldn't be spending much time here, just a quick evening, so it was a case of finding the most reasonably priced hotel that had good TripAdvisor reviews, which is why we landed on the Delta, which was great. Then finally Vancouver. On our previous trip, we stayed in the Fairmont waterfront right by the cruise terminal. We absolutely loved it here, but the cost was a little higher than we wanted to pay. Trail finders had an offer on with the Pan Pacific Hotel over the road, directly above the cruise terminal, so we went for this and we didn't regret it. It was perfect for the night before our cruise. Overall, it was a mix of hotels on this trip, some towards the luxury end and some more basic, to suit what we needed in each place, but all of them were great and we'd happily stay in all of them again, and we were really happy with our choices here. Quickly touching on the car and driving more generally. For car rentals, we always tend to use Alamo whenever we can. They have really clear packages on their website, they have a good range of cars and prices, and they don't try and upsell on insurance. We've used them many times over the years and we've never had any problems at all. In terms of the car itself, we go for an intermediate SUV whenever we've got a fair amount of luggage. As a family of 4, we find this just about has enough room for the 4 of us and 4 suitcases, and it feels nice and comfortable. This is what Trailfinders were offering as part of their package as standard, so it was really easy to book. The driving aspect of the trip was so easy. The roads were really easy to navigate, and I think we only experienced bad traffic twice. Once driving through the centre of Banff and once arriving into Vancouver. The rest of the time it was plain sailing, amazing scenery and just a fantastic place to explore and drive around. Our rental package included a full tank of petrol, so we only had to fill up twice, I think, so petrol costs weren't really an issue. The only thing I would say is this route and itinerary is that there's a lot of driving and we were pretty tired towards the end, so the cruise was a welcome rest. I think really this itinerary is probably better suited to 2 weeks if you've got the time, to slow down the pace and spread out the driving a little bit. Nevertheless, we still had a brilliant time and it did fit really nicely with the cruise where we were able to relax and take a slower pace. With everything then in place, we moved on to planning our time day by day in more detail, again reading the guidebooks, watching vlogs to find the best things to do. We made sure to pre-book any specific activities we wanted to do, for example cruise excursions, activities and tours etc. And again we'll talk through these in more detail in other vlogs later on in this series. We found on past trips all these extras add up really quickly, so we try and budget for them early on, rather than incurring them while we were away. After all of this, we ended up with quite a detailed itinerary to make sure we knew what we were doing each day so we could cover everything we all wanted to do. It was a lot of work planning everything, but it was a lot of fun and we'd definitely do it all again. Then finally on costs, while we were away we have a daily budget of around £200 a day to cover food, petrol, souvenirs, parking and other bits and pieces. We found on average this is a good general guide for us and what we spend while we're away on this type of trip. Sometimes we go a little bit over and some days we spend a little bit less. For the cruise part of the trip we only spent a fraction of this each day, as most things are included in the cruise price, although we did have to budget for tips which were around $15 per person per day we think. For this trip we found we were pretty much spot on our budget. We found the cost of everything in Canada to be much lower than in the UK or USA, which was a really nice surprise. So we were able to relax and spend a bit more as we went, rather than watching the budget really closely the entire time. For this reason, we'd really recommend a vacation in Canada, as in terms of affordability, it was much better than the US. And before we finish, just a final note on wildlife, as this was a big factor in us booking this trip. Obviously, when you think Canada and Alaska, you think bears, whales, wolves, moose, etc. Watching lots of vlogs and hearing lots of stories, you naively expect that going in there'll be wildlife everywhere. In fact, we found it a lot harder to spot. For example, despite us trying, we didn't spot a wild bear in all of our time in Canada. And we were told that moose were pretty rare in the areas we were visiting, so it really is down to luck. We did spot a couple of elk while we were driving and some eagles, but it wasn't until we got to Alaska that we saw a bit more. So it's best to reset your expectations, and particularly those of the kids. That being said, it's always best to be prepared, and although we weren't planning on any huge walks or hikes, we made sure to buy some bear spray from a local shop on our first day in Banff, so we had some form of protection if we did unexpectedly run into a bear. We also made sure to read up on all of the guidance on the Parks Canada website on what to do in these situations to make sure we were able to stay safe throughout our trip. So that was an overview of our planning for our trip to Canada and Alaska. As I said, the rest of this series will be covering everything in much more detail, including the places, the hotels, what we got up to and the cruise itself. Next week we'll be continuing by focusing on our Disney cruise to Alaska, so keep an eye out for that. We hope that this was useful for your adventure, and if you've got any questions or any other tips, then please let us know in the comments below. Please make sure to like and subscribe to our channel, as it really does make a big difference. Thank you all so much for watching.